Hello and welcome to the class. My name's Paddy. Today we're going to talk about part one of the speaking test. If you have any questions after this class, you can click on the chat icon at the top of your page here. If you click on that icon, you will be able to send us a message with any questions that you have. This is the second class of two classes, and this video will last just over 20 minutes. First, we're going to look at how to prepare for the speaking test, and then we're going to look at how to extend your answers. So by the end of this video, you will be more prepared for speaking in part one of the exam. During this video, there will be some questions for you to answer. You can find these below the video. I will tell you when you need to answer the questions, and I will give you about 10 to 15 seconds to do so. Okay, let's get started. So in part one of the speaking exam, the examiner is going to ask you some questions about you, your life, your experiences, your opinions, your habits, and your routines. There are hundreds of possible questions that they could ask you. A good way to prepare is to imagine that you are the examiner. If you had to write questions for an IELTS Part 1 test, what questions would you ask? The aim of this exercise is not to memorize answers to all of the questions. It's impossible to memorize answers to all of the questions out there, and also a memorized answer is very obvious in the exam and it will lose you a lot of marks. Your answers should be natural, responding to the question when it's asked. Don't use a pre-recorded answer in your head. The aim of this activity is to practice your ideas. Think of a question and think of what ideas could you use to respond. One of the biggest challenges facing students is just not having enough to say. Your English may be good, but you may not be able to think of ideas quickly. So preparing for the test by predicting questions is a good activity. So if you want to practice some questions before the exam, it's a good idea to do this by topic. In class 1, we looked at 10 topics that often come up in part 1. So let's take the topic of shopping. I'm going to try and think of lots of questions that I might get about shopping. A good way to do this is to start with the question words. What, who, how long? These are all common question word beginnings. Do you and have you are yes or no questions, which you may also get. So on the topic of shopping, I'm going to try and think of all the possible questions I might get. And I'm going to start with what. So I've thought of 3 questions. What kind of shops do you usually visit? What are the effects of online shopping on local businesses? And what is a wholesaler? One of these questions is a part 1 question. The other 2 are not part 1 questions. Look at the first question below this video and choose the option which is a good part 1 question. Question A is a part 1 question. What kind of shops do you usually visit? It's asking about you, your life, and your routines. It's not a global discussion question. Question B is more of a part 3 question. It's asking you about the general effects of something in society. It's not about you. Part C is testing your knowledge of something. You would never get this in the IELTS speaking test. So let's think about the topic of friends. I'm going to try and predict some questions that we might get on this topic in part 1. And I'm going to use the question beginnings, how long and how often. Let's think about some questions we could make using those phrases. Look at the next question below this video. There are 2 questions which are part 1 questions. The others are not. Choose the 2 correct part 1 options out of A, how long have you known your best friend? B, how often do you see your friends? C, how long is your friend? D, how often does your friend invite you to play video games? And E, how long does it take to make new friends in a new city? The two part 1 questions are, how long have you known your best friend and how often do you see your friends? The other questions are either not for part 1 or they're just a little bit strange. So one good way of preparing for these topics is to mind map your ideas. This is where you think of a central idea and then you think of connected topics and think of questions on those topics. Let's look at the topic of home. I'm going to show you some questions that could be related to home. I'd like you to decide if they are related or not related. Look at the next question below this video and choose the 3 options which are on the topic of home. A, who do you live with? B, did you get a lot of homework when you were at school? C, describe your house or apartment. D, what places would you recommend in your city? E, what kind of house would you like to live in? And F, do you prefer to spend your holidays at home or do you prefer to travel? Which of these questions is the topic of home? Look at the next question below the video and choose 3 questions. The incorrect answers were B. This is related to school and education, not home. D, this is related to your hometown, the city. It's not really about your home. And F, I would say, is more about holidays and vacations than it is about your home. So the correct answers were, who do you live with? Describe your house or apartment, and what kind of house would you like to live in? These are common questions that ask you to talk about your current situation and maybe to talk about a possible future. So using those 3 questions, we can start to create a mind map of vocabulary and ideas to use in our answers. Remember, you might not get those 3 questions, but you might get questions which are very similar to them. So the first question was, who do you live with? So that's asking about people. The next question was, describe your house. So it's talking about the physical building. Let's build up some language and vocabulary we can use to talk about that. And the other one was, where would you like to live? So your dream home, if you could live anywhere. The purpose of this activity is to prepare for these questions by giving yourself ideas of what to talk about. So with people, I can talk about the fact that I live with my sister, my parents, and my grandfather. What can I say about those people? As for my building, I can talk about the interior, the inside, and I can talk about the outside. As for my dream home, I can talk about the features of it, and I can talk about where it would be, the location. Using these subcategories, I can start to write down notes about what I could say. So inside my house, I might say there are 3 bedrooms. There's a modern kitchen. I've got a cozy living room, so that's a good adjective to use there. It does get a bit cramped. Think of some negative things to say, some opinion phrases. I usually hang out in my bedroom, so now you're linking it to activities that you do. You've got lots of antique furniture in your house. Again, this is an opportunity to make a note of the vocabulary. Doing it this way means your brain is already connecting those ideas. So when they ask you a question on this topic, it's going to trigger those memories. Outside my house, well, it's a 2-story house. That means it has 2 floors. It's relatively modern, the design. I've got some solar panels on the roof. I've got a large garden. It's very spacious. That's a good adjective to use. It was built 40 years ago, so I can start to talk about the history of the building. Remember, none of this actually needs to be true. You're giving yourself language to use and ideas to talk about. So here, we've got all of this language just from my building. You could do the same thing for the people in your home and the same thing about your dream home. And then move on to a new topic. Do the same thing. Think of 3 or 4 important questions on that topic and mind map those ideas. It's a way of building up vocabulary and building up things to say in the exam. So we've prepared for the exam, we've got lots of ideas of what to say. But when it comes to answering the question, sometimes it can be difficult to know what direction to go in with your answer. Let's take an example. The examiner asks you, do you do any sport in your free time? Now, answering yes to this question is probably going to give you more options. But let's say, for example, that you say, no, I don't. Maybe you're being honest. This is not always the best idea, but this is your answer. So how can we extend a negative answer like this? Well, there are a number of ways that you can add to this, and practicing these strategies is a very good idea before the exam. You can give reasons for your answer. So why don't you like sport? Well, I work long hours in my job, so I rarely have time. This is a great response. You could talk about the effects of your answer. So I don't play any sport in my free time. I'm not very fit in general, although I do eat healthily. This is another way of extending your answer. You could add more information. I don't do any exercise either. I'm not a very active person. You could also give an example. So this is a negative answer. How could you give an example? Well, you could think of a hypothetical example. If I have to choose between staying in bed or going for a run, I'd choose staying in bed. You could compare yourself to somebody else or compare your situation to another situation. So I don't play sport. My brother is much more sporty. He's always training. You could give your opinion. Sport is not something that everybody finds enjoyable. And you could talk about your desire for the future. So I would like to try climbing in the future. It seems fun. So you can see here how from a negative answer, we can then think of ways of extending it. A short answer, like no, I don't, is not going to get you any marks. But adding information, even if it's not directly answering the question, is a good thing to do. Now, if I want to add this information, I need to make use of some linking phrases. There are linking phrases for all of these categories of extending your answer. First, reasons. What language can we use to give reasons for something? This is because. No, I don't do any sport in my free time. This is because I work long hours in my job, so I rarely have time. Effects. What linking language can we use for effects or results or consequences? This means that. No, I don't do any sport in my free time. This means that I'm not very fit in general, although I do eat healthily. We could also say so here. Remember, these linking phrases need to be informal. You're not using formal language like as a consequence. That would be too formal. Now I'd like you to think about some possible linking phrases. Look at the next question below this video and focus on addition. What expression of addition could we use to connect this answer? I don't do any exercise either. I'm not a very active person. Choose the option that could go before this phrase. The options are also, nevertheless, or moreover. A good linking phrase to use here would be also. No, I don't do any sport in my free time. Also, I don't do any exercise either. I'm not a very active person. So this word either is another way of adding negative information. Now let's think about examples. What phrase or expression could I use to introduce, if I have to choose between staying in bed or going for a run, I'd choose staying in bed. Look at the next question below this video and choose the option that we could use to introduce an example out of. Therefore, now I'm going to give you an example, or like. So here we could use like. No, I don't do any sport in my free time. Like, if I have to choose between staying in bed or going for a run, I'd choose staying in bed. Like is a very informal, natural way of introducing an example. Now let's think about comparison. I'm comparing myself to my brother and he's different, so I'm making a negative comparison. What expression or phrase could I use to introduce this negative comparison? Look at the next question below the video and choose the option we could use to introduce this negative comparison. The options are unlike, differently, or conversely. The correct linking phrase here is unlike. But unlike is not followed by a sentence, my brother is much more sporty, it's followed by a noun phrase. So I'd have to change this sentence a little bit. Unlike my brother, who is much more sporty? So I've used a relative clause there. Now, opinion. What expression could we use to introduce this opinion in an informal way? Look at the next question below this video and choose the correct option for introducing an opinion out of according to me, apparently, or I guess. So a good informal expression to use here would be I guess. No, I don't do any sport in my free time. I guess sport is not something that everyone finds enjoyable. Desires. My answer was negative, but I want to show that my desire for the future is different to this. So again, we want an expression that negatively contrasts with what I've just said. Look at the next question below this video and look for a phrase or expression which can contrast with my first answer. The options are and, having said that, or so. A good expression to use here would be having said that. So, no, I don't do any sport in my free time. Having said that, I would like to try climbing in the future. It seems fun. Make a note of these linking phrases and other linking phrases you can use in your answers. Practice extending your answers by giving examples, reasons, effects, or other things. It's a good way to prepare for the test. That is the end of the class. Now it's time to do the extra training and practice activities on this topic. Remember, if you've got any questions for us, you can click on that chat icon at the top of your page to send us a message with any questions that you have. Thank you for listening.